I am Clarabelle, 34 years old, and my grandparents meant the world to me. They were the steady hands that guided me through life when my parents were too busy chasing status and wealth. When they passed away last year, I inherited $26 million. My parents, who had barely visited them during their final days, suddenly appeared with demands and anger in their voices. I stood my ground and refused. Let me know where you are watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I honored my grandparents while finding my own strength. Growing up in a picturesque New England suburb, my childhood memories are painted with warm afternoons in my grandparents' cozy kitchen and cool evenings listening to their stories on the porch swing. Their home wasn't extravagant, but it was filled with more love than any mansion could hold. No one would have guessed they were sitting on a fortune. They lived simply focused on what truly mattered. My parents, Howard and Gwendolyn, were always racing toward the next big achievement. Dad worked tirelessly in finance, climbing the corporate ladder with singular focus. Mom pursued her fashion career with equal intensity, networking at high-profile events and traveling for exclusive shows. Their ambition left little room for family time, so weekends and holidays became synonymous with visits to Grandpa William and Grandma Eleanor. "Clarabelle, sweetheart, come help me with these cookies," Grandma would call out every Saturday morning. The kitchen would fill with the aroma of vanilla and chocolate as she taught me her secret recipe passed down through generations. "The secret ingredient is patience," she would whisper, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Just like in life, Grandpa William had built his wealth from nothing. Starting with a small hardware store after returning from military service, he slowly expanded into a regional chain, then diversified into real estate and investments. He never flaunted his success, driving the same reliable sedan for 15 years and fixing things around the house himself. "Money is just a tool, Clarabelle," he would tell me while teaching me to fish at the small pond behind their house. "It's important to know how to use it, but more important to know it doesn't define you." These fishing trips became our special tradition, where life lessons flowed as steadily as the stream nearby. Grandma Eleanor had been an elementary school teacher for 30 years before retiring. Her passion for education never waned, and she devoted countless hours to helping me with homework and encouraging my curiosity. "Questions are the compass of the mind," she would say, never tiring of my endless inquiries about everything from dinosaurs to distant planets. Their modest two-story colonial home sat on 2 acres of land with a vegetable garden. Grandma tended daily, and a workshop where Grandpa restored antique furniture. The interior was comfortable rather than luxurious, filled with books, family photographs, and treasures collected over decades of marriage. The dining room table, handcrafted by Grandpa, had hosted 50 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings. As my bond with my grandparents strengthened, they became my emotional anchors. When I struggled with middle school friendships, Grandma taught me empathy. When I faced academic challenges, Grandpa showed me perseverance. They attended every school play recital and sports game, beaming with pride from the front row, while my parents sent apologetic texts about work emergencies. Under their guidance, I learned the value of a dollar through a weekly allowance system that included saving, spending, and giving portions. Grandpa would take me to open my first bank account, explaining interest rates and compound growth with remarkable patience. Grandma would bring me along to volunteer at the local shelter, showing that our time and kindness were the most valuable currencies we possessed. Their home became my sanctuary, a place where I felt truly seen and valued. The lessons they imparted went beyond practical skills, shaping my character and worldview. They taught me integrity was non-negotiable, kindness was strength, and that true wealth came from how richly you lived and loved. These values formed the foundation of who I would become, guiding me through the complexities of growing up in a family where material success often overshadowed emotional connection. The tension between my parents and grandparents was palpable even to my young eyes. I remember hiding at the top of the stairs, listening to heated discussions that would erupt whenever my parents visited. Their voices would rise, then suddenly hush when they remembered I might be within earshot. "Your values are outdated, Dad," my father would argue, his voice tight with frustration. You need to understand that appearances matter in our circles. The way you live sends the wrong message. Grandpa would respond calmly. The only message I care about sending is that happiness doesn't come from impressing others, Howard. I worked hard so you wouldn't have to struggle, not so you could chase status symbols. These philosophical differences created a widening rift. Howard, my father, viewed his parents' modest lifestyle as an embarrassment, a failure to capitalize on their financial success. He couldn't understand why they lived in the same house for 40 years when they could afford a mansion, or why they drove sensible cars instead of luxury models. My mother, Gwendolyn, was particularly vocal about her disappointment when my grandparents declined to fund her boutique clothing line. "I just need startup capital," she had pleaded over dinner one evening. "It would be an investment in family." "We believe in you, Gwendolyn," Grandma had replied gently. "But we think taking a small business loan would be more appropriate. The struggle will make your success sweeter." Mother had stormed out, dragging my father with her. They didn't return for Christmas that year, leaving me to celebrate with my grandparents while ignoring the empty chairs at the table. The pattern of neglect became more pronounced as I grew older. When Grandpa turned 70, my parents sent a generic card 3 days late. When Grandma broke her hip at 72, they visited once during her 2-week hospital stay, spending most of the 30-minute visit checking emails on their phones. My teenage years became an exercise in divided loyalty. At home, my parents would make dismissive comments about my grandparents' simple-mindedness and lack of ambition. At school events, they would paste on smiles for brief interactions with my grandparents, then quickly find excuses to leave. "Your grandparents just don't understand our world," my mother would say, adjusting her designer sunglasses after a particularly tense interaction at my 16th birthday party. "They mean well, but their ideas about money and success are limiting." By the time I reached high school, I learned to navigate this divide carefully. I kept a change of clothes at my grandparents' house, swapping designer outfits my mother insisted upon for comfortable jeans and sweaters that wouldn't make my grandparents uncomfortable. I developed a code with my friends who would cover for me when I said I was studying at the library, but was actually spending time at my grandparents' home. One spring afternoon during my junior year, I overheard a conversation that crystallized the situation. My father was on the phone and his home office door slightly ajar. "Look, I know they have money," he said in hushed tones. "They just choose to live like they don't. Trust me, when the time comes, we'll be well taken care of. They can't take it with them." That moment revealed the transactional nature of my parents' relationship with Grandpa and Grandma. They weren't interested in the wisdom, love, or time my grandparents offered. They were waiting for the financial windfall they assumed would come. The realization was both heartbreaking and clarifying, pushing me further into my grandparents' orbit and teaching me to question the values my parents championed. As I watched my parents chase designer labels, country club memberships, and vacation homes they rarely had time to enjoy, I contrasted their perpetual dissatisfaction with my grandparents' contentment. Grandpa and Grandma found joy in simple pleasures, gardening together, reading by the fireplace, hosting neighborhood potlucks. Their wealth, which I still didn't fully comprehend, never defined or controlled them. This stark contrast shaped my understanding of what truly constitutes a rich life, setting me on a path that would eventually lead to the most difficult decision I would ever make. When college application season arrived in my senior year of high school, my parents had already mapped out my future: an Ivy League education, followed by law school, then a prestigious position at a corporate firm. They assumed I would follow this blueprint without question, just as they assumed I shared their priorities. "We've arranged for you to tour Princeton next weekend," my mother announced over a rare family dinner, not looking up from her phone. "The daughter of Dad's colleague just got accepted to their pre-law program. The family connections will be invaluable." I took a deep breath before responding. "Actually, I've already decided on Westfield State." The silence that followed was deafening. My father put down his fork. "That small public university, the one near your grandparents." His voice was dangerously quiet. "That's not happening, Clarabelle." "It has an excellent education program," I explained, feeling my heart race but my resolve strengthen. And yes, being close to Grandpa and Grandma is important to me. The argument that followed was explosive. My parents couldn't fathom why I would throw away opportunities and settle for mediocrity. When their arguments failed to sway me, they resorted to their most powerful leverage: money. If you choose this path, we won't pay a penny toward your education. My father declared certain this ultimatum would end the discussion. I surprised all of us by responding, "I understand, I'll figure it out on my own." That summer became a crash course in financial independence. I worked 3 jobs, morning shifts at a local bakery, afternoon hours, tutoring high school students, and weekend work at a retail store. I applied for every scholarship available, wrote countless essays, and met with financial aid advisors. Grandpa and Grandma offered to help, but I gently declined, knowing it would only worsen the rift with my parents. My determination paid off when I received a partial scholarship that, combined with my savings and a manageable student loan, made Westfield State possible. I moved into a tiny dormitory room, that fall filled with secondhand furniture but abundant optimism. Throughout college, I maintained my financial independence through work-study programs and part-time jobs. I rarely saw my parents during those years. They made token appearances at major holidays, but showed little interest in my academic progress or growing passion for educational psychology. My relationship with them deteriorated further when I declared my intention to become a special education teacher, rather than pursuing the lucrative career they had envisioned. My father called it a waste of potential, while my mother worried what she would tell her friends when they asked about my career. After graduation, I secured a position at Riverdale Elementary School, working with children who had learning disabilities. The salary was modest, but the work was profoundly fulfilling. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment in a converted Victorian house filled with plants and books rather than the luxury items my parents considered essential. My apartment became my sanctuary, a place that reflected my values rather than my parents' expectations. The walls were painted sunny yellow, adorned with student artwork and photographs of meaningful moments. My furniture was eclectic pieces rescued from thrift stores and lovingly restored with techniques Grandpa had taught me. The kitchen was always stocked with ingredients for Grandma's recipes, which I prepared when needing comfort or celebrating small victories. Meanwhile, my parents' appearances in my life became increasingly performative. They would suddenly contact me before important social events, asking me to attend as the dutiful daughter. At these functions, they would introduce me with careful framing. "Clarabelle is so passionate about her teaching, such a giving spirit." Their tone suggested they viewed my career choice as a charming but temporary idealism I would eventually outgrow. As Grandpa and Grandma entered their 80s, their energy began to wane. I noticed Grandpa taking longer to climb the porch steps, Grandma needing more breaks while gardening. I began visiting more frequently, bringing groceries, helping with household tasks, and simply providing company. "You work too hard, sweetheart," Grandma would protest when I insisted on cleaning the gutters or repainting the fence. "You should be enjoying your youth. Being here with you is exactly where I want to be." I would respond truthfully, treasuring these moments that I somehow knew were becoming precious and finite. During these years, my parents rarely inquired about their parents' health or needs. When I mentioned that Grandpa was using a cane after a minor fall, my mother merely nodded absently. When I explained that Grandma was having trouble with the stairs, my father changed the subject to his recent promotion. Their indifference strengthened my resolve to be present for my grandparents, to give back a fraction of the love and support they had always given me. Little did I know how soon this commitment would be tested, or how profoundly it would change the course of my life. The call came on a Tuesday evening in October. I was grading papers at my kitchen table when my phone lit up with Grandma's number. "Clarabelle, dear." Her voice trembled. "Grandpa collapsed in the garden. The ambulance is here now." I arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, heart pounding, to find Grandma sitting alone in the waiting room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The diagnosis came just before midnight: stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had already spread to his liver. The prognosis was 3 to 6 months. "Have you called Dad?" I asked gently as we drove back to their house in the early morning hours. "I left a message," Grandma replied, her voice small. "He must be busy." It took my father 3 days to return the call, and another week to visit. When he finally appeared at the hospital, his discomfort was evident. He stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, checking his watch repeatedly during the 15-minute visit. "The office is swamped right now," he explained as he prepared to leave. "Big merger. I'll try to come back when things settle down." My mother visited once, bringing an extravagant flower arrangement that overwhelmed the small hospital room. She spent most of the visit talking about her recent charity gala, barely acknowledging Grandpa's deteriorating condition. I requested a leave of absence from my teaching position, arranging for a long-term substitute to cover my classroom. My principal, understanding the situation, assured me my job would be waiting when I returned. For the next 3 months, I essentially moved into my grandparents' home, converting the study into a makeshift bedroom. Those months were both heartbreaking and precious. Grandpa's decline was swift, but punctuated by moments of profound connection. During his more lucid days, he shared stories from his youth I had never heard, offered wisdom about life and loss, and repeatedly expressed how proud he was of the woman I had become. "You remind me of myself," he told me one evening as I adjusted his pillows. "Not afraid to choose your own path, even when it's not the easiest one." When he became too weak to leave his bed, I brought the outside world to him. I placed bird feeders outside his window, read him the newspaper each morning, and played the jazz records he loved. Grandma and I worked in tandem, tag-teaming his care with the help of visiting nurses. My parents called occasionally, but always had excuses for their absence. Business trips, social obligations, minor health concerns of their own, all took precedence over spending time with Grandpa in his final days. When the end came in January, it was peaceful. Grandpa simply drifted away while holding Grandma's hand, with me sitting at the foot of the bed. My parents arrived for the funeral dressed impeccably in designer mourning attire, accepting condolences from people who had been present throughout Grandpa's illness while they had been absent. The funeral was exactly as Grandpa had requested, simple, meaningful, with his favorite bluegrass band playing at the reception. I delivered the eulogy, my voice steady, as I shared the lessons he had taught through both words and example. My father sat stiffly in the front row, while my mother dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Grandma's decline began almost immediately after losing her partner of 62 years. Though physically healthy before Grandpa's illness, she seemed to shrink before my eyes, losing weight and vitality. The spark that had animated her faded, despite my best efforts to reignite it. "I'm not giving up, dear," she assured me when I urged her to eat more or join me for short walks. "I'm just ready to join William. We were never meant to be apart for long." I extended my leave of absence, unable to imagine returning to work while Grandma needed me. My parents, meanwhile, began calling more frequently, but their concerns centered around practical matters. "Have you thought about selling the house?" my father asked during a rare visit. "It's too much for Mom to maintain." "Your father is right," my mother added, surveying the living room with appraising eyes. "We could find her a nice condo, something manageable." Grandma, overhearing this conversation from her armchair, met my eyes and gave a slight shake of her head. I understood immediately this was her home, filled with 60 years of memories. She would stay. 6 months after Grandpa's passing, Grandma followed him. I found her one morning in her garden chair, a peaceful expression on her face, her favorite book open in her lap. The paramedic said it was likely a stroke, quick and painless. Once again, my parents made brief appearances, going through the motions of grief without its substance. The funeral was another small, intimate gathering, honoring Grandma's request for simplicity and meaning. A week later, we gathered at the office of Stanley Friedman, my grandparents' attorney for decades. My parents arrived early, dressed formally and exuding confidence. I arrived precisely on time, exhausted from weeks of grief, but determined to honor my grandparents' final wishes, whatever they might be. Stanley, a kind-faced man in his 70s, greeted us with appropriate solemnity before retrieving a sealed envelope from his desk. William and Eleanor were very clear about their wishes. He began adjusting his reading glasses. They updated their will annually, with the most recent revisions signed just 2 months before William's diagnosis. My father leaned forward slightly, his expression carefully neutral, but eyes alert. My mother crossed her legs, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. Stanley began reading the formal legal language, and I felt strangely detached, as if watching the scene from above. Then specific phrases began to penetrate my fog of grief. To our beloved granddaughter Clarabelle, we bequeath the entirety of our estate. My father's sharp intake of breath broke the silence. This includes the family home and property, all financial investments, and accounts ownership shares in Williams' hardware business and personal effects, with a total approximate value of $26 million. The room seemed to tilt. $26 million. My grandparents, who lived so modestly, had amassed such wealth. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process this information. My father stood abruptly. "There must be some mistake," he said, voice tight. "They would never bypass their own son." Stanley removed his glasses calmly. "There is no mistake, Howard. Your parents were of sound mind and very deliberate in their decision." My mother's face had drained of color. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "We'll contest it, of course." Stanley retrieved another envelope. "William anticipated your reaction. He asked me to provide this letter if you expressed such intentions." The letter in Grandpa's familiar handwriting explained that after careful consideration, he and Grandma had decided their values and legacy would be best preserved through me. The letter mentioned their disappointment in my father's life choices, his apparent interest in their money, rather than their company, and their concern that the wealth they had carefully built would be squandered on status symbols, rather than put to meaningful use. My parents stormed out before Stanley finished reading, leaving me alone with the weight of my grandparents' final gift and the responsibility it represented. The first voicemail arrived before I even left the attorney's office. My father's voice, usually so controlled, shook with rage. "This is unacceptable, Clarabelle. Call me immediately. We need to discuss how to fix this situation." By the time I reached my car, my mother had sent a series of increasingly frantic texts demanding I do the right thing and think about family. I turned off my phone, needing space to process what had just happened. 3 days later, as I sat in my grandparents' kitchen now, technically my kitchen, trying to sort through decades of accumulated memories, I heard the distinctive sound of my father's luxury SUV crunching up the gravel driveway. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation I had been dreading. They entered without knocking, a united front of indignation. My father looked around the familiar space with new eyes, as if mentally cataloging its value. My mother moved directly to the china cabinet, running her finger over Grandma's prized collection. "We need to talk, Clarabelle." My father began, his businessman voice firmly in place. "This situation can still be resolved amicably." "There's nothing to resolve," I replied quietly. "Grandpa and Grandma made their wishes clear." My father's professional demeanor cracked. "Their wishes. They were my parents. That money should rightfully come to me, their son. You manipulated them when they were vulnerable." The accusation stung, but I held firm. "I did nothing of the sort. I was here because I loved them, not because I expected anything in return." My mother stepped forward, her approach more tactical. "Darling, we understand you were close to them. That's lovely, but managing this kind of wealth requires experience. Your father has the financial acumen to handle these assets properly. The same acumen that has you remortgaging your house for the third time." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Stanley had briefed me on my parents' financial situation, which was far less stable than their lifestyle suggested. My father's face flushed dark red. "You have no idea what you're talking about. We have investments opportunities that require capital." I think Grandpa understood exactly what he was doing. I countered, finding strength in the certainty that I was defending my grandparents' wishes. The conversation devolved quickly. My father threatened legal action, claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. My mother alternated between tearful pleas about family loyalty and thinly veiled threats about my reputation in the community. When they finally left 3 hours later, nothing was resolved. My father's parting words hung in the air. "This isn't over, Clarabelle, not by a long shot." The next few weeks brought escalating pressure. Daily calls, emails, and texts came not just from my parents, but from aunts, uncles, and cousins who had rarely shown interest in my grandparents while they were alive. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion about what should happen to the inheritance. Anonymous comments appeared on my school's social media pages, suggesting I had taken advantage of elderly relatives. Rumors circulated in my parents' social circle that I had isolated my grandparents and poisoned them against their son. The stress began affecting my sleep, my appetite, and my ability to focus on everyday tasks. I realized I needed professional guidance to navigate the situation. On the recommendation of Stanley Friedman, I scheduled a meeting with Catherine Winters, an estate attorney specializing in contested inheritances. Her office, unlike Stanley's traditional space, was modern and bright, with walls adorned with abstract art. "Your case isn't unusual," Catherine assured me after listening to my story. "Unfortunately, money often brings out the worst in families. The good news is that your grandparents did everything correctly from a legal standpoint." With Catherine's help, I drafted formal responses to my parents' threats of litigation, making it clear that I would vigorously defend my grandparents' wishes. The situation came to a head 2 months after the will reading. My parents requested a family meeting, bringing their own attorney, a sharp-faced man named Richard Dawson. We met at a neutral location, a conference room in Catherine's office building. "We're prepared to file a formal challenge," Richard began without preamble. "We have grounds to argue that William and Eleanor were unduly influenced during a period of declining health and diminished capacity." Catherine remained unruffled. "That would be difficult to prove, given that they updated their will regularly over a period of 20 years, with consistent provisions regarding their granddaughter. Additionally, their physician confirmed their mental competence at their last appointment, just prior to the final will update." My father leaned forward. "They were not thinking clearly. No parent would disinherit their only child without manipulation." I had remained silent, but now I opened my laptop. "Grandpa and Grandma left more than just legal documents," I said quietly. "They left these for me to share if necessary." I played the first video recorded in Grandpa's study 6 months before his diagnosis. His image appeared healthy and clear-eyed, sitting beside Grandma in their familiar armchairs. "If you're watching this, Clarabelle, it means we're gone, and our decision has been challenged," Grandpa began. "We want to be absolutely clear that this choice was made with sound minds and full hearts." Grandma continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Howard, if you're seeing this, please know that we always loved you. But love doesn't mean approving of all choices. We've watched you prioritize appearances over substance, status over character. We've seen how money has shaped your values in ways that sadden us deeply." They explained in painful detail the years of neglect, the visits that revolved around financial requests, the dismissal of their values as outdated or irrelevant. They described their careful observation of my character and choices, and their belief that I would honor the principles that had guided their lives. By the time the video ended, the conference room was silent. My father stared at the frozen image of his parents, color draining from his face. My mother looked away, examining her manicure with sudden interest. "There are 12 more videos like this one," I said quietly, "recorded over several years. There are also journals, letters, and conversations witnessed by their friends and community members. If this goes to court, everything will become public record." Richard Dawson cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take some time to reconsider our position." My parents left without another word, their attorney trailing behind with promises to be in touch. They dropped their threat of legal action the following week. In the months that followed, I found myself adrift in unfamiliar waters. The enormity of my inheritance created a strange sense of unreality, as if I were living someone else's life. I took a full year's leave from teaching, needing time to grieve, and to thoughtfully consider what to do with this unexpected responsibility. I sought guidance from various sources. Stanley introduced me to Eleanor Hoffman, a financial advisor who specialized in helping clients align their wealth with their values. I began therapy with Dr. Rachel Marcus, who helped me navigate the complex emotions surrounding my inheritance and family conflict. "Your grandparents trusted you with their legacy," Dr. Marcus reminded me during one particularly difficult session. "But that doesn't mean you have to carry the weight of their expectations alone. This is now your journey." As I sorted through my grandparents' belongings, I discovered a hidden dimension to their lives. In a locked filing cabinet in Grandpa's study, I found records of anonymous donations to educational charities, scholarship funds they had established at local schools and quiet support they had provided to community members in need. One folder contained letters from students who had received scholarships, never knowing the source of their funding. Another held newspaper clippings about community projects they had supported from behind the scenes. My grandparents had been practicing stealth philanthropy for decades, finding joy in giving without recognition. This discovery crystallized my decision. With Eleanor Hoffman's guidance, I established the William and Eleanor Bennett Foundation for Educational Opportunity. I allocated $15 million to the foundation, creating an endowment that would fund scholarships, teacher training programs, and educational resources for underserved communities. The foundation will focus on creating opportunities for students who face barriers to education. I explained to the board members I had carefully selected educators and community leaders who had known and respected my grandparents. We want to embody the values of hard work, persistence, and service that defined my grandparents' lives. For myself, I chose a middle path between my parents' materialistic lifestyle and my grandparents' extreme modesty. I purchased a comfortable but not ostentatious home in a diverse neighborhood near my school. I invested the remaining funds conservatively, allowing me to return to teaching without financial pressure, while supporting causes I believed in. My parents' reaction to the foundation was predictably negative. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned they had dismissed it as a publicity stunt and a waste of family resources. They began spreading rumors that I was mentally unstable, suggesting that grief had clouded my judgment. Their attempts to undermine the foundation backfired when local media picked up the story. A feature in the Boston Globe highlighted the foundation's first round of scholarships, including interviews with recipients whose lives would be transformed by the opportunity. The article mentioned my grandparents' lifetime of quiet generosity and my desire to continue their legacy. The positive publicity led to additional donations from community members and local businesses, expanding the foundation's reach. I found myself increasingly comfortable in my role as foundation president, drawing on my educational background to develop programs that would create meaningful impact. 6 months after establishing the foundation, I organized a formal launch event at the community center my grandparents had anonymously helped renovate years earlier. The evening was designed to honor their values while introducing the foundation's mission to the community. As I prepared to address the gathered crowd, I spotted my parents slipping into the back of the room. Their presence was unexpected, their expressions unreadable. I continued with my planned remarks, sharing stories about my grandparents and outlining the foundation's goals. William and Eleanor Bennett believed that education could change lives, I concluded. They believed in quietly doing good without expectation of recognition. Through this foundation, their values will continue to shape our community for generations to come. The applause was warm and genuine. As the crowd dispersed to the reception area, I noticed my parents lingering near the display of photographs chronicling my grandparents' lives. I approached them cautiously, unsure of their intentions. "This is quite a production," my father said, his tone impossible to read. "Grandpa and Grandma would have hated the attention," I acknowledged. "But they would have loved knowing that their resources were helping students achieve their dreams." My mother glanced around at the diverse crowd of educators, students, and community members. "You seem to have found your calling." She observed something like surprise in her voice. "I learned from the best," I replied simply. They didn't stay long departing before the evening concluded, but their appearance marked a crack in the wall of hostility that had defined our relationship since the inheritance. 2 weeks later, I discovered through Stanley that my parents had been forced to list their vacation home for sale. Their financial situation had deteriorated further, with credit card debt mounting and investment losses accumulating. The facade of wealth they had maintained was crumbling. The knowledge left me conflicted. They had made their choices prioritizing appearance over substance, just as my grandparents had observed. Yet they were still my parents, and their impending financial collapse brought me no joy. After much reflection and consultation with Dr. Marcus, I made a decision that surprised even me. I reached out to my parents with an offer of financial counseling and a structured support plan with conditions attached. I would not simply hand over money, but I would help them transition to a more sustainable lifestyle if they were willing to engage in family therapy and financial education. Their initial response was pride-fueled rejection. But as their situation worsened, my father contacted me with reluctant acceptance. It was a small beginning, tenuous and fragile, but a beginning nonetheless. 1 year after inheriting my grandparents' estate, I stood in their garden, now bursting with the spring flowers Grandma had planted decades ago. The foundation was flourishing, having supported over 200 students with scholarships and educational resources. I had returned to teaching, finding renewed purpose in my classroom work while balancing my foundation responsibilities. The journey had transformed me in ways I never anticipated. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, standing firm against pressure and threats. I had learned to navigate complex financial decisions, to lead a nonprofit organization, and to articulate a vision that honored my grandparents while creating my own path. Most surprisingly, I had found an unexpected ally in this journey. Jackson Meyer, the quiet, thoughtful history teacher, whose classroom was across the hall from mine, had become first a trusted friend, and then something more. He had supported me through the darkest days of conflict with my parents, offering perspective and steadiness when everything seemed to be shifting beneath my feet. "Your grandparents would be proud," Jackson said, now joining me in the garden. "Not just of the foundation, but of how you've handled everything with such grace." I leaned against his shoulder, grateful for his presence. "I still miss them every day. Sometimes I come out here just to feel close to them." Our relationship had developed, slowly built on shared values and mutual respect. Jackson understood my need to move carefully to ensure that my decisions came from a centered place, rather than reaction to loss or sudden wealth. His patience and unwavering support had been a balm during the most challenging year of my life. The previous week had brought another unexpected development. My parents had invited me to dinner at their new home, a modest condominium they had purchased after selling their oversized house. The evening had been awkward, but not hostile, marked by tentative attempts at connection. "Your foundation gave a scholarship to Jim Peterson's grandson," my father had mentioned over dessert. He was very moved by it. It was a small acknowledgement, but significant coming from him. The family therapy sessions, while difficult, were beginning to create tiny bridges across the chasm that had separated us for so long. My mother had shown me around their new space with a mix of embarrassment and pride. "It's taking some adjustment," she admitted, "but there's something freeing about having less to maintain." These were small steps, and I harbored no illusions about complete reconciliation. Too much had happened, too many harsh words exchanged. But the scorched earth was showing signs of new growth, tentative and fragile though it might be. Jackson and I had begun collecting my grandparents' stories, recording memories from their friends and community members. The project had started as a personal tribute, but was evolving into a potential book about their philosophy of quiet generosity and meaningful living. "People are hungry for examples of different ways to define success," Jackson observed as we compiled the interviews. "Your grandparents offer a powerful counter-narrative to the constant pressure for more, bigger, flashier." At the local university where I had earned my teaching degree, I established the William and Eleanor Bennett Scholarship for Future Educators, specifically targeting students who wanted to work in underserved communities. Each year, I would meet with the recipients, sharing stories about the educators who had inspired the scholarship. The inheritance that had initially felt like such a burden had become a tool for creating meaning and impact. The money itself was secondary to the values it could express and the opportunities it could create. I had found a balance that honored my grandparents' legacy while allowing me to live authentically. The journey had taught me lessons I never expected to learn. I discovered that money truly does reveal character, bringing both the best and worst in people to the surface. I learned that family bonds, while important, are ultimately defined by love and respect rather than biological connection or obligation. Most significantly, I realized that choosing a meaningful life aligned with personal values brings a fulfillment that no amount of wealth could provide. Perhaps the most challenging lesson was about forgiveness. I had not forgotten my parents' actions or excused their behavior, but I was learning that holding on to anger only limited my own growth. Forgiveness didn't mean allowing further harm or pretending the past hadn't happened. It meant releasing the power that resentment held over me, freeing myself to move forward with clarity and purpose. Standing in the garden that spring day, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive during the tumultuous year. The decision to honor my grandparents by refusing my parents' demands had been difficult, but unquestionably right. By standing firm, I had preserved not just the financial legacy, but the values that gave it meaning. As the sun began to set, painting the garden in golden light, I thought about the true nature of inheritance. The most valuable things my grandparents had given me weren't captured in legal documents or bank statements. They had given me a model of integrity, the courage to follow my own path, and an understanding that true wealth is measured in how we touch the lives of others. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what's left to us, but what we choose to do with it. What about you? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that put you at odds with family but aligned with your values? Leave a comment below like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about navigating life's challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it offers some encouragement for your own path forward.